Hey everyone, it's OSK. Today I wanted to discuss a few changes I'd like to see for Spellbreak. I know we have patch 1.2 right around the corner, but for now I just wanted to discuss a few short-term and a few long-term changes I'd love to have to keep the game fun, and also to help cut down on the parts of the game that don't feel particularly rewarding or fun for that matter. This is just going to be my personal top 5, and I'm sure you have your own suggestions, so please leave them in the comments once you're done watching the video. Now without further ado, here are my top 5 changes I'd like to see in Spellbreak. Let's get into this. The first change I'd like to see is the addition of upgrade stations. These upgrade stations would allow you to place a piece of gear, whether it be a gauntlet, rune, or some equipment into the station, and retrieve a legendary variant in return. These upgrade stations will be located in the center of every progressive zone and would allow one use per player for each zone they spawn in. It would possess a major drawback when in use by completely unequipping the piece of gear from the user for a period of time until the upgrade is done. The different times to wait would also scale with the rarity of the gauntlet, so if you put in a common gauntlet it could take up to a minute to upgrade, or if you put in an epic gauntlet the upgrade would take about 30 seconds. I really want to make using the upgrade station punishing for the user, as it is a free way to gain a legendary gauntlet outside of a mana vault. I want to encourage high risk, high reward behavior so we never have dead time in the game. A few strategies could emerge from this as well. Do you drop on Fort Halcyon in the center of the map to always be in the best place to run to the upgrade station and get a legendary gauntlet in the early game? Do you camp the upgrade station to punish players trying to get free upgrades? I feel like there are so many ways to play around it that it would be a very welcome addition to the game. That, and you also don't have to rely on the RNG of a mana vault drop table to get the best loot in the game. It could also discourage zone camping, as each upgrade station would disappear after each zone closes. I feel like this would be a great change, especially with this next change I want to see. The second change I'd like to see is a change to the loot table, but in a very large way. My proposal is that we completely change the nature of loot in the early to mid game. Instead of randomly being able to get high rarity gear from all chests, we completely adjust the rarities of normal chest loot. I'd like to give credit to King Kaizen for proposing this change in his video on the subject, and it was such a good idea I've decided to include it here as well. What we do is leave floor loot the exact same. It can spawn common and uncommon rarity items, so no problem throughout the entire game. What I do want to do is scale each piece of loot throughout each progressive zone. So at the very beginning of the game, all that would spawn from chests is common loot. After the first zone is done rotating and the timer restarts, then all chests would spawn uncommon loot, the third zone would spawn rare loot from all chests, and so on. This would continue on until all the loot spawned from chests is epic. You can think of it this way: as you level up, you get to spawn more and more rare loot. This would give a true sense of progression in the game, and when paired with the upgrade stations from the first change, it could make for some very fun strategies. I think mana vaults should still be a thing and should still be powerful, but I think we either scale them down depending on what zone they're in, or just move more scrolls instead of more amazing gear to limit someone getting a legendary gauntlet and auto-winning against someone with all common gear in the early game. I think this would really help the pain of not getting as good of loot as your opponent in the early game, as the most health advantage someone would have off drop is just 20 extra armor from a common belt. All damage will be relatively the same, fights would be longer and take more skill to close out, and I think overall it could be a very good change. It would also create a sense of urgency to get into the upgrade station in the early game, which would allow, again, for some crazy fights in those areas. Not only that, but with this change, we could start labeling and balancing classes around how good or bad they are at different points in the game. For example, Pyromancer and Stone Shapers are really good in the early game due to their damage, and don't really change in power much the more gear you get. Tempest, Conduit, and Frostborn don't really shine until much later in the game when you get all your gear components, so you could balance the game around that to an extent. And one last change I would like to see from the drop table is normal chests dropping much less scrolls. I think having to loot scrolls into the mid-game sometimes from normal chests just wastes a lot of time and is obnoxious, and plus Finders Keepers would be better for it. I think we should increase the scroll drops from mana vaults, keep epic chests spawning guaranteed scrolls, and let exiles drop 2 scrolls instead of just 1, or even make an entirely new talent for it. This would incentivize getting more exiles early on and make players play riskier to get the upgrades they want, which I think is healthy for a BR. Again, high risk, high reward. If you don't want to risk it, you ain't getting the biscuit. For change numero 3, I would really love it if Proletariat could add a bit of a dynamic Spellstorm. Currently, the Spellstorm closes on each progressive safe zone and basically just applies damage with no other effects. What I would like to see is maybe when the zone finishes a full rotation, the outer parts of the hollow land start to crumble and collapse into the fracture. To counter this, maybe we make the zone close slower, but make the time between zones shorter. And speaking of fracture, maybe they could add a mechanic where the more the Spellstorm closes, the more the fracture expands into other areas. And while the land is breaking apart, rocks and debris can begin floating, much like the Pandoria rocks from the movie Avatar, and offer more platforms to travel on for a more dynamic late game. I think this would be really lore-friendly and would add a lot more to consider for late-game scenarios. It would also help combat early-game zone camping and would force players to consider the Spellstorm an actual threat instead of a minor inconvenience. I just really want the game world to be more interactable and completely different than any other BR I've ever played, and I think this change would really help in that regard to keep things fresh. The fourth change I'd like to see is one players have been asking for almost 2 years now, and that is smaller team game modes. Modes like 5v5 Capture the Flag, King of the Hill, or even an arena deathmatch with 3v3, 2v2, or even 1v1 with multiple rounds. I personally know that some people are just really tired of the Battle Royale genre, myself included in general, and this would help ease some of those complaints, and one of these new modes might even be Spellbreak's new staple mode. I do know that we have Clash coming out with its 9v9 chaotic self, but with these smaller game modes, I see queues that are easier to fill, which means shorter wait times, and because they have less players in general, which makes them less chaotic, you could really open the door to my fifth and final change, a ranked mode or even the return of a leaderboard. And this time I mean a good leaderboard. The one we had in pre-alpha was based on total wins and refreshed every week, so whoever was free to play 24/7 usually got number one on the leaderboard. This time, if a leaderboard was added instead of a ranked mode, I'd like to see KD, win rate, and average exiles factored in and divided by region with a variety of durations like yearly, monthly, weekly, daily, and even all-time. Now, if a ranked mode was implemented, that'd be much better, but a good leaderboard would be okay for now. Really, what we need is a reason to keep grinding this game, other than to just keep getting better at a personal level, or just to play with friends or outside events. It'd be nice if we had something built in game for this instead of relying on other methods. Also, as an unforeseen honorable mention, I'd like to see the spectator client improved for personal casting and production purposes, but I'll leave that whole subject for another day. Thank you guys for joining in. What did you think of this list, and what would you change? Please let me know in the comments below. Personally, these are my true top 5 things that I think are of highest priority to not only draw people in, but also to keep them playing so I have more fodder for my content. Anyway, please be sure to like the video and subscribe, do the YouTube thing. Be sure to also follow the socials down in the box below, as well as the glorious Twitch channel, where you can find me streaming this lovely game, as well as practicing my casting live on the air. Thanks again for joining in, have a wonderful day, and I will see you all out there.